trapped underneath the crust prior to the flood, by which the world that then existed perished, being flooded with water. So Peter is saying the land was out of the water, land was in the water, and that water came out to flood the earth, is really what is being said in 2 Peter. So going back to New American Standard, verse 1:9 through 10, let the waters below the heavens be gathered into one place, and let the dry land appear. And it was so. And the next, just this next animation, just before we started here, I just want to say this again is the crust has been placed between the two waters, and now it's been animated by Eric to show the fact that the crust would flow. And it's hard to imagine rock flowing, but again, it's hard to imagine 60,000 pounds per square inch. And the unbalance is there, so the rock would have flowed, dropping pillars down onto the mantle, creating areas for the water to go into to let the dry land appear. And we'll just take in this animation. And so I asked him to slow it down so that in the discussion, and this would have created a tremendous amount of heat actually while it's doing this. And there would have been melting of metals. There would have been melting of everything in the granitic crust. The lowest melting thing is the quartz in the crust, and it would have melted out. Iron and nickel would have melted out, concentrated at the pillars, and these pillars would have been hot. The next one is a side view of a cubic, kind of looking at a cube of the earth, also showing the pillars going down, the dry land appearing, and the seas appearing as the pillars drop down. Again, this is theory, but it goes along with what the Bible says, and it also goes along with how the flood could have occurred. And so the pillars are dropping down through the water, the dry land appears, and it's very possible that the earth before the flood, we see all kinds of huge flora, huge dinosaurs, huge oysters, the earth had this incredible amount of vegetation prior to the flood. We know that from many different ways, we can look at through the fossil record. Because the mountains were much lower, the winds would have been different, the weather would have been different, the entire earth would have been much more watered. And we also have from Genesis that the ground was just misting up and watering. And so there was a tremendous amount of vegetation on the earth in a condition of shallow seas and not so high mountains. An additional assumption, and this isn't really an assumption, this is more of a fact. This is a fact. If this is the way the earth really was, if the theory is correct, then what would have happened is all the waters that are trapped underneath the crust, but all interconnected because these pillars wouldn't have kept one side of the earth's water from moving over to the other side of the earth. It is a fact that since the moon was created on the fourth day, the lunar effect of the moon upon the earth would have created tides, a tidal effect on that subterranean water. In other words, when the moon was close to the near side of the earth, it would be trying to pull the water from the back side of the subterranean chambers to the front side and would have lifted, and I'm going to say 15 inches. There's a reason for saying 15 inches. It would have lifted the near side crust 15 inches, dropped it back down, lifted it, dropped it back down twice a day. Because that's how many times we experience a tide. Now, the average tide of the earth today is 30 inches, while it was 15 inches back then. Now, when you lift a 10-mile crust 15 inches and let it back down, you're talking billions of pounds of mass moving and going back, and work, the definition in physics world, work is equal to force through a distance. And it's 15 inches is not much distance, 10 miles of crust is a lot of force. And that work created heat. So the other part of the theory that's recently come together for Dr. Brown is not part of the 7th edition book, is that this thermal condition of heating up the water and heating up the pillars as they would have been bouncing off of the mantle as this lunar effect was occurring, was adding so much heat to that water that the temperature and pressure of this water is greatly increasing over the 1,600 plus years between creation and the flood. And so while everybody's willy-nilly up on topside, getting evil, as it turns out, to the days of Noah, down deep underneath them, this tidal effect is adding temperature and pressure, which is about to become their judgment. And so it's a very important assumption, and again, it's a fact that if there was water, it would be heating up. There would be a tremendous amount of heat being added to that subterranean water. So now we have to get a little bit really scientific here. But there's going to be some benefit for those moms that have always wondered why a pressure cooker works better. So there's supercritical temperature water. Dr. Brown theorizes this temperature increase to the water getting above 705 degrees, which is called supercritical. Water has a saturated temperature and pressure relationship between freezing and 705 degrees. And here's a water. This is actually right to this level is a pint, which I'm going to tell you, supercritical water, this is worth a half a stick of dynamite in energy, is where we're going with this. But if I wanted to boil this water, how hot do I have to get it? Anybody here, any of you science experts here? 212. At atmospheric pressure at sea level, 212 degrees. So as soon as I heat this water up at 212 degrees, it starts boiling, because there's 14.7 pounds absolute pressure at atmospheric pressure at sea level, which we're at, that the pressure is trying to keep it from boiling. That's here. We don't feel it because it's all around us. And at 212, it'll start boiling. Well, years ago, just because of people knowing the effects of water, is they invented pressure cookers. This happens to be Juanita's and ours. And no matter how much, this is the thing for kids, I want to cook this thing, I want to boil this egg a lot faster by turning the heat up. You're not heating up that egg any faster. No matter how much it's boiling, it's still only 212 degrees. So what you have to do is, to make that water boil hotter, is you have to pressurize the water. And this is what pressure cookers are. And they make this lid, they make the lid so that it actually goes inside and like this, because it's made to pressurize 10, 15 pounds. If pressure's increased at 10 pounds, it'll boil it at 240 degrees. And if you have a 15-pound pressure cooker, it'll boil at 250 degrees. That's why if you boil a chicken in a pressure cooker, it can get done a lot quicker, because it's getting hotter. The water's hotter inside. If there were a way to increase the pressure, like for this one, there's a little weight that goes on there. If I press it down, I could increase the pressure to the point where the pan could blow up. If you have one of those glass pots, if you were to push down the lid tightly when it's boiling, you would see the boiling stop, because you're putting just a little bit of pressure. You would stop the boiling until the water heated up to the new pressure boiling point, and then it would start boiling again. And if you pushed it down and got it to stop boiling, and then it starts boiling again, you lifted the lid off, it would explode in boiling, because it's instantly got to all explode in boiling to get down to that temperature of atmospheric pressure again. But you don't want to do that, because it would actually erupt violently enough to possibly scald you. So again, don't do that at home. But now this pressure temperature relationship continues all the way up to 705 degrees. That's where water does something incredible. A recent discovery about this critical point of water is actually helping to clean up extreme chemical waste, because critical point of water has properties that are being used to disassemble chemical waste. But all the way up to 705 degrees, if you could see in the container that could hold the pressure, and it's like 3,200 pounds at 705 degrees, so, it wouldn't be a glass container, but if you could look through it, you would see a water layer and you would see a steam layer. You would see the vapor, water vapor, and you would see the liquid side. As soon as you get to a little over 705 degrees, the critical point of water, you no longer see liquid water. The line between liquid water and vapor disappears. And all that there are is microscopic globules of liquid water, 10 to 20, at certain pressures just above critical point, 10, 20 molecules of liquid water surrounded by all the liquid vapor, the water vapor. The properties of that. So it actually would look like mush. It looks like water mush. But the issue is, if you drop the pressure on that critical water, it explodes with an energy that completely unleashes the remaining thermal energies as far as creating steam, so now it'll expand 5,000 times. So in other words, if this was critical, this much water at critical temperature, if I then, and the steel vessel would have to be an inch thick to hold it if it was steel, and if I could somehow break that vessel, this amount of water would expand 5,000 times in volume, which is what an explosion does. And this is worth, that much water is worth a half a stick of dynamite. This is half a stick of dynamite. So what does this mean? That means that if 2 pounds of water, a quart, is equal to 1 stick of dynamite, this is a pint, so it's only a half a stick of dynamite. And what does that mean? That means if this water heated up to over supercritical, and there's reasons to believe it went over 850 degrees, then if a crack in the earth occurred, and that water has a way of escaping to atmospheric pressure, the amount of energy released is equivalent to billions of hydrogen bombs of energy. We cannot fathom the amount of energy that's contained in half of the volume of our oceans being heated up to supercritical water temperature 10 miles below the crust, and the crust breaks, and the amount of energy that is coming up, it has the power, and again, Walt Brown, mechanical engineering, physics, MIT degree, you can work the calculations of the amount of energy. Is it big enough to launch rocks and debris into space? Yes. What would happen if you launched rocks and debris into space along with water? They would become comets. They would become asteroids. They would be out there, and that's why they're containing minerals from Earth that were super hot at one time. It explains so much of what they're finding out. The energy is there to do it. So the Lord saw the wickedness of man was great in Genesis 6:5, and God said to Noah, the end of all flesh has come before me, for the earth is filled with violence through them, and behold, I will destroy them with the earth. Make yourself an ark of gopher wood, make rooms in the ark, and cover it inside and outside with pitch. God knew this was happening. He knew the wickedness of man was coming. There is a good argument against this theory. It is a theory that would basically, well, sooner or later, the crust would have to break, even if man hadn't sinned. Well, I don't care what kind of flood scenario you put together, there was something going on to flood the whole earth, and God just knew. He knew what was going to happen. There was something about the sin of man that he triggered the break of the crust one day. The boat is big enough to fit inside of a full-size football stadium. You know, from front row seat to front row seat is how big it was, and it had 3 levels, and it was enough to put in all the kinds of, it was enough room for all the animals to go into. No windows to see out of, because they're not going to want to see what's coming down. In other words, this had to be a heavy-duty boat to endure what the world was about to see. And he shut Noah in with the animals. People ask, I want to just make this one point. People say, how did he round them all up? Well, it's a fact that in the Sumatra quake of Christmas time, 2 Christmases ago, people were in shock that these elephants in Thailand that were, in Banda Aceh and these other places, they just ripped out their chain pegs out of the ground and they head for high ground. They're widely reported in the news media. Why did all these animals start heading for the hills? Because God told them. I mean, that wave is still way out there. The wave before it comes into the land is only a couple inches thick, a couple inches high above the normal. They're not going to feel anything different. They're not going to. The earthquake has already occurred. They felt the earthquake. The tsunami came to Thailand much later. God said, "Get out of Dodge. I'm dealing with humans on this one." And what did he do in Noah's day? I mean, the Bible doesn't say, except that all the animals went there. Our God told those animals, go get in the ark with Noah. Then he unleashed the power reserved in the subterranean waters when, in the 600th year of Noah's life, in the 2nd month and the 17th day of the month, on that day, all the fountains of the great deep were broken up. Now, if you don't understand that there's water underneath the crust, What does the Bible mean when it says all the fountains of the great deep burst up in one day? And the windows of heaven were open and the rain was on the earth 40 days and 40 nights. Global rainfall. Now people say, well, Kevin, you've just convinced me this 800-degree water under the crust is coming blasting out of this crack that would have scalded everybody. No. Because when the water, the liquid part of the supercritical and those globules of molecules of liquid water exploded themselves into steam, expanding the volume 5,000 times, and then going many more times by depressurizing the atmosphere, it would have cooled off. Because you depressurize any gas, it cools off. And not only was it cooling off because of that, but some of it, it says the windows of heaven were open. This fountain, launching from the crust of the earth, which Walt's done the calcs, if you're 1,000 miles away from the crack, you could survive if you have a boat. And there was only one guy with a boat that was built for it, him and his family. So everything within 1,000 miles is basically dead in the shock wave. And so everything 1,000 miles away would have originally been able to try and live with the downfalling rain. This would have created a global rainfall. The center of the fountain would have been jettisoning stuff into space. The sides of the fountain, because not as much velocity, ripping up the ends of the crust, sending sediments all over the world, burying billions of plants and animals all over the earth that are creating the fossil record all over the earth. The energy destroying the sides of the crust and eroding it would have then created just rainfall all over the earth for 40 days. But the stuff that's going up straight, it's heading to space, some of it had enough energy to keep going, to leave Earth's gravitational field and to go into orbits around the sun. But some of it would have gone up, not had quite enough energy, fallen back down as dry ice, because there was carbon dioxide in the subterranean chamber. Some of it would have come down as dry ice. Some of it would have come down as just regular, dry ice being frozen carbon dioxide, and some of it coming down as just regular hailstones, only much smaller. And I've talked to some people, oh, you know, the mammoths, because the mammoths were buried by this. The mammoths would have died in the hailstorm. It would have ripped their flesh apart. No, it wouldn't have. When stuff falls through the atmosphere, if you fall from a tall building, you're hitting the ground about as far as you jump out of a plane because of what's called terminal velocity. You only get going so fast when you're falling down through air. So this stuff would have come down,